We're very pleased to be here today, honored to have been allowed to make a submission. Closer, can you hear? Okay, to make a submission for the Pier 8 Park competition. To sort of start with the sort of top portion of this panel, the way that we start just about every project in the office, we really try to kind of understand the spirit of the place. What is kind of special to the site? And for this project, we really look to the geology of Hamilton, to the Niagara Escarpment, and what that could sort of bring to a kind of shoreline condition. So, you know, we started by actually examining in plan what the escarpment looks like. That's a kind of plan diagram looking at it from the Bruce all the way down to Hamilton. And then these are very small, but then looked at it sectionally with respect to the site. We know that it's a 2 meter to, in some places, 3 meter drop from the Pier 8 residential development. So there's, you know, a substantial grade change, as we heard in the previous presentation. We looked at what would happen if you sloped it. Then we looked at what would happen if you actually sort of started to kind of work with an abstracted idea of escarpment and stepping tiered landscape. And then that idea then evolved to, could we push and pull that kind of tiered landscape so it has a kind of plan memory more of the original escarpment idea, so that it actually starts to make sheltered spaces and make moments along the sort of length of the shoreline, which can be inhabited with program, which is sort of that final diagram. So then when we look at the kind of aerial view of that, you can kind of start to see the stepping, which makes a kind of, in many cases, so this pointer shows that, like, I'm out of control here, shows how that kind of stepping can make a very gradual and gentle transition from the Pier 8 residential development, and also the kind of pushing and pulling that starts to make indentations and kind of soft, sheltered spaces along the shoreline, where we discuss in future panels the sort of major programmatic pieces that occupy the shoreline. Overlaid, this is an important image I kind of want you to focus on right now. So overlaid on the idea of this kind of armature of the abstracted escarpment is the idea of Hamilton's industrial heritage, or actually its ongoing industry. And so what we've done here is, this is sort of centrally located on the northern shore, is the city of Hamilton, you probably know, has salvaged several trusses from the building that was originally on site. So we've taken those trusses and we've inverted them, effectively turning them upside down to kind of create a sort of umbrella structure for the promenade. That, in addition to kind of working with a palette of materials such as perforated steel plate bridges, steel barriers along the waterfront, and then particularly this area here, which is a kind of series of shipping containers that we've organized along the eastern side of the site as, again, sort of inside, outside spaces, and also two-story, so it can kind of, again, deal with the kind of grade change and the sort of transition from the upper level to the lower level. So the sort of overlay of the industrial is sort of overlaid on the sort of abstracted escarpment. So I'm going to bring your attention to the plan right now. So if we go, and then I'll go back and forth between some images. So we have a series of waterfront shoreline plantings, and they start here and kind of run along the length of the promenade that kind of unify, give a kind of unity to the entire park area. Starts here in front of the future urban water building here on the westerly side, And then here is sort of one of the first moments of these kind of major programmatic pieces. This is a constructed constructed pool with wetland plants that is, the water levels will fluctuate from Lake Ontario. And then there's a sort of principal bridge that runs across it. So if you turn your eyes to this image for a second, you see there's a kind of immersive experience as you walk across that bridge through the wetland planting, where someone can sort of stop and look and sort of appreciate the flora and fauna of that ecosystem. I'm going to flip to another, no, I guess, yes, where is my other slide of that? Back? Yeah, so there's, sorry, another image of an aerial image of that same marshland pond, which I think the importance of this, we've actually taken, I think we were allowed to sort of take up close to about 30% of the shoreline. So this marshland park actually sits very close to the lake, the edge of Lake Ontario, where you can kind of view the sort of waters of the marsh up against the lake and the kind of sort of significant planting, immersive sort of planting experience that affords. And then the other thing I think is important, because we're talking about how to, make the approach from the residential area as generous as possible. So this is the first of one sort of gentle sloping ramps at 5% and less that brings you down to the kind of continuous, smooth, 6-meter wide, meandering, multi-use trail that runs all the way through the promenade. And I'll go to the next plan. So again, up here we have the sort of additional plantings, and here is where the pavilion is located. It's pretty well centrally located along the sort of northern shore at this time. And we have looked at that image before here at the nighttime view. So those existing trusses are overclad with a polished, perforated, mirrored stainless panel that provides a kind of diaphanous cladding to the structure, so that during the day it has a kind of dappled light effect. Here it's located, beneath it is a sand basin that's located under this structure. And again, it sort of has this tiered kind of stepped basin where children can play, parents can sit. It's sort of like a modern day conversation pit where parents can observe their children and still take the pleasures of the sand. And then at night, this actually results in a fairly large structure. So the illumination of the lantern at night actually can be seen from afar. We're not quite sure whether it can be seen from the other side of the water. But certainly it works as a kind of guide to bring people in boats safely to shore during the evening. Then back to the plan. So sorry about this. If we then look at the sort of next feature here, again, when you look at the panels again more closely, you'll see all of the moments where we can bring people from the upper levels gently and gradually down to the sort of major promenade. But here is another major feature along the promenade, which is a very, very shallow wading, paddling pool, if you will. I mean, at this point, because again, it has the sort of stepped nature of the sand basin. It ranges in 6 inches to sort of 24 inches in depth. And the idea behind that, so if I then draw your attention to this image, is that again, that sort of stepped nature allows people to just either put their feet in the water, sit in the water, lots of places to observe small children playing in the water. And that pool is fed from a waterfall that is cascading over the stepping stone of the escarpment underneath another one of these perforated steel plate bridges and feeding the water of the pool where children and parents can enjoy. So, and then the thing that we think is powerful, and remembering that much of this park is viewed from above, is that it's been developed much like an infinity pool, so that the water will flow over the edge. Safety is dealt with by a glass guard along here, where it still allows for the movement of warm water. So it's a kind of very immersive experience of this water body next to the great body of water of Lake Ontario. And then just off to the side, this is as if you're sitting on the sort of upper part of the escarpment. Large parts of this escarpment we've called for lawn, a kind of drought-resistant lawn seed mix. With this, in this case, this is a view back over the pool, a view back to the east, and it's really a kind of an area that is where we've developed the kind of the urban tree canopy based on mostly Carolinian species, but some boreals, kind of a mix of north and south at this point. And then next panel, so as we get close to the corner of the site, again, this is sort of more of this urban canopy with a sort of generous lawn under it that sort of stretches along this portion of the park, more shoreline planting. And it's this point where the kind of stepped nature of the promenade really steps up, lifts up, and raises to what we are calling the outlook, which is a promontory that has, significant views over the water, back to the west and back to the south. So it's a kind of significant place on the site. It can be accessed at grade by the sort of Pier 8 residential development this way. It can be accessed here by another ramping system just to the south of it. And it can also be accessed by sort of a series of the stepping of the escarpment. And I shouldn't say, I'll talk a little bit more about the escarpment in a minute. How are we doing time-wise? 10? That the stepped nature of the undulating escarpment not only provides kind of amazing amount of seating capacity for people to use, it's also a kind of play device where children can move up and down so that they can sort of act, so that the multiple ways of approaching this lookout is sort of partly by climbing and crawling up to this promontory. So it really can be accessed in multiple number of ways. And if we look at the view, it's sort of hard to see, and I would really encourage you to go look at our panels later, because these actually are kind of nice drawings. It's got a view across to the sort of industry to the east, but it becomes a kind of sculptural form where the promenade lifts and thrusts at that easterly edge. It's basically, we're proposing that structure be developed in cast-in-place concrete. It'll probably have caisson piles, and it'll be overclad with either stone cladding. In our estimate right now, we're saying that we've got that kind of concrete, that the tiered landscape is made from precast concrete. But I should say that we've actually just had information confirmed that we could probably also build this entire landscape out of an escarpment stone found somewhere in Owen Sound. So it's stone or precast, pinned to the underside of this lookout and set over the top of the lookout. Again, with this idea of a kind of low iron, almost invisible crystal kind of like glass guard, so that really all that you're experiencing afar is the lifting and sculptural quality of that pier. And then as we wrap around the corner, we have developed what we call a shipping container village. It's really taking a look at using a kind of modular component of the shipping container. It's not an original idea. Shipping containers have been developed in public parks around North America to great success. So I have to say it's a bit of a borrowed idea, but we think, again, it really speaks to the industry. It's a kind of component, something that can be built up of components, so they can be open, they can be closed, they can become interior spaces, they can be insulated, lots of ways of working with that. And so the important thing, I think, here is to see this broken black line here represents where the future 1,500 square foot, 1,500, right, square foot building could be. It could be made I mean, and right now that is in our cost estimate, but not as a heated structure. It could be made out of shipping containers. It's something that we would be interested in pursuing should we be successful. I think what's really important about the shipping container village and the shade pavilion is that they're quiet architectural pieces, that they don't overtake the sort of beauty of being at the water's edge, that we really wanted to concentrate this scheme about the beauty of what the edge can be and how this terraced landscape can reinforce the kind of shoreline and flooding conditions that could be experienced in the future. So we really are focusing on the urban canopy, the kind of qualities of the escarpment and the materiality of the escarpment materials, and then finding structures that are quiet and gentle and fit in well to the project. So there, again, this second time we're looking at this, but you can see there's a series of ideograms about how those shipping containers can be used. They can be used with just, an awning, a shade structure. They can be used here. I think we're showing it as a flea market. That's a sort of food booth. They can be used as sort of temporary art exhibit shelters. So multiple number of ways. And again, I think it's important. This is a kind of the slightly more urban side of the park that leads people in from the southeast side of the site. And then I guess I'm probably finished a little bit early. Oh, I do want to, again, it's really worth really would encourage you to take a look at these on the panels. These two diagrams speak to microclimate. They speak to the idea that we want to, we live in a northern city, right? So we want to try and extend the use of the promenade into the shoulder seasons. So the kind of in and out of the escarpment, the hard surface of that abstracted escarpment becomes heat sinks. So we can get really nice sort of hot rocks at certain times later in the year, as well as it also kind of protects against prevailing winds. So shelter and heat, just to mitigate and sort of try to manipulate the microclimate of the site. And then this is a super important diagram, which is a sort of lesson that we learned from a Danish urbanist, Jan Gehl, many years ago, about how do you organize, how can you build something that encourages people to use it? So we've also borrowed his terminology, which is talkscapes. But that sort of terraced in and out of the landscape allows people not to sit side by side on a bench and have a conversation, but to sit across from each other and have a conversation. It allows groups of people to kind of collect in some parts, where an individual could be 5 feet away but oriented different and have their privacy. So rather than kind of bench systems, long linear benches, we really feel that this is a way of kind of really maximizing, super maximizing the use and the number of people that can come and use this site in a very comfortable way. With respect to people in wheelchairs, it also accommodates someone coming up along one of these steps, getting out of their wheelchair and still sitting on one of these stone steps. So all of that has been kind of considered within this kind of talkscape escarpment strategy. Then just a final word on sustainability real fast. We're proposing some solar panels on the top of the shipping containers. We haven't shown them, but we think we can also include solar panels on top of the shade pavilion. So the idea that any kind of power requirements we have, any pumping that we would do in terms of irrigating for the first couple of years from Lake Ontario is an idea, would be kind of a net zero approach to using energy on the site. We're certainly, through the kind of system of shoreline grasses, et cetera, managing our site water. We would also look to perforate the flat areas of the stone paving, again, to sort of manage the water and to filter it before it's discharged into Lake Ontario.
Just a question about that area where you have the water feature. Is that a splash pad? Is that a wading pool? Is that Is that a pool? And how does it function in the off-season? What does it look like in the off-season? That's my one question. The second question, if I may, is your own sound ledge rock, is that for the elevation parts, or is it actually walking surfaces that you're proposing that in as well? Just a quick question on that too. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, last question first. Yeah, we see the escarpment and the horizontal surfaces as being one material. So should we actually go to a natural stone? Yes, we would see that. We realize there's a selection and the smoothness of that would be an issue, and we would deal with it. Easier to do it with the precast concrete, of course, but yes. So a kind of, dry laid system largely throughout the entire site, and then with the sort of more structural application of it at the outlook. With respect to the pool, we have already been asked that question, so I could give you a bunch of answers. Really what we wanted, we know that it doesn't necessarily make sense for it to have, okay, let me back up. The pool can be as shallow as we need it to be, as long as we can strike that kind of infinity quality to it. It could be 6 inches deep. It could be a pool, we understand, any sort of chemical treatment is we would work with the City of Hamilton to work that through. So we made a proposal in our project, because we're working on a natural swimming pool right now, that we could do natural filtration through a system of hydrobotanic filters and granular filters. We realize that's probably not where the City of Hamilton wants to go with this. But we've also just recently completed a pool, less sustainable, in Toronto, in June Caldwood Park, where the pool is always constantly filling and draining, which would be a possibility here. You'd want to make the pool a little bit more shallow, not to waste so much potable water. So it's a balance there, but we're sure that between either a kind of constantly recirculating, that we can work through some sort of water feature. And off-season, good question. I think it is part of the kind of terracing of the site. So it's a kind of continuous feel. I think it would still look great if it's empty. Could we skate in it? Maybe not. Anyway, it's a good question, and something that would definitely take further consideration. I think what's really important about any of the questions that we've been asked is we think they're solvable. Does it calibrate the design? For sure. But can you keep the design intent? And I think that, no question, we can.
Linda, did you have? Perfect.
The stepping stone sort of terraces, are there any formal staircases down?
Yeah, within as often as we have a ramp, probably even more often, there are formal, Ontario Building Code stairs complete with rails that are incorporated into that, yeah.
When we talked before, just an addendum to my point before, it was great, thank you for your support, but the basic AODA, I know it doesn't always get met. One of the places I know locally, there's an elevator to get to the second floor, but none of the offices on the second floor have an automatic door opener. So my concern about the AODA is that the minimum, it might be met, but it certainly isn't sufficient. So on that note, I shall make my exit. These have been some interesting presentations.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Thank you, GH3.